UFC Fight Night, Sean Strickland versus Nassourdine Imavov. Welcome to the first UFC Fight Night of 2023. Boxing MMA picks, of course, we're here to give you that prediction, that analysis from that betting perspective for the UFC. We want to let you know which fights are worth the value, which underdog you can potentially go with, some parlay action towards the end of the video as well. If you're new to the channel, please take a look at what we have to offer. Please make sure that you check out the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. Subscribe to the channel. Also hit the thumbs up on this video. And most importantly, we want to hear from you in the comments. Of course, we know for this main event, Sean Strickland filling in for Kelvin Gastelum. We will get to those details when it's time to talk about that fight. But for this first UFC Fight Night event of the year, before we move on, of course, let's introduce ourselves. I go by the name of Harris, and of course, I have Zahn with me, again, giving those UFC predictions. But 12 fights for the first card of the year, 7 of them on the prelims, 5 of them, of course, on the main card. Let's get started with our prelims, and let's get started with fight number 1. We're looking at Priscila Cachoeira taking on Sijara Eubanks. This one's taking place in the flyweight division. Priscila Cachoeira is on a 2-fight winning streak. She beat Ariane Lipski in her last fight. Really just has one style, but she is a threat with that style. She's a pressure and brawler type of fighter. She's going to throw those heavy hands. She's going to stay in front of you, kind of control center. Most of her punches are power punches. Doesn't even really take time to set things up. She kind of just stalks you down and uses that power, right? She will feint the jab a bit. She will throw the calf kick here and there, but again, she's really just looking for that moment to load up and unleash on you. She is a bit of a liability on the ground, not really the best takedown defense, not really the best submission defense, kind of just gives up that position and essentially forfeits the round, if not gets finished from that perspective. And she's taking on Sijara Eubanks, who can do a little bit of everything. She hasn't fought since the end of 2021, though, when she lost to Melissa Gatto at that time. Again, like I said, she can do a little bit of everything. She's a decent MMA boxer. She's willing to engage, willing to trade shots. She has that front low kick that she uses to score points, open things up, open up those boxing opportunities. Oftentimes, she likes to play the role of counter puncher. She can come forward as well, though. So it'll be interesting to see what she does against a dangerous striker in Cachoeira. She has solid takedowns. She's also a BJJ black belt. So again, that overall ground game is solid. A good takedown defense early in fights, but I don't think that will matter for this one. And we know for Sijara Eubanks that cardio has been an issue in the past. She doesn't really have that extra gear. Now for this fight, a little bit tricky. Cachoeira should be the bigger fighter here. Cachoeira fights at 135. Eubanks has switched between 135 and 125. So Cachoeira could be and should be the bigger fighter here, as we can see the height advantage. I can see Eubanks landing the takedown though, still. At least a takedown or two early in the fight. I think that's where she can find her success. I can see Cachoeira's power and pressure potentially being too much as well, right? So either fighter has their potential paths to win this fight. I think the bad thing for both fighters is that neither of their cardios is great. So that makes both of them very unreliable. But Sijara Eubanks has shown me that, she has enough toughness to kind of side with her on this one. I think once the cardio was out the door for both of them, I can see Sijara Eubanks still kind of bringing this fight to the ground, kind of having that lay and pray type of style being implemented so she can conserve her energy, and that possibly putting that final round or two in her favor. But more importantly, I can see her resorting to takedowns in general, as a way to sort of take away from that one-dimensional threat that Priscila Cachoeira is. So Sijara Eubanks, for me, just a little bit more to offer in terms of her MMA ability, but dangerous fight no matter which way you go. I am going to start with picking Sijara Eubanks, though.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to speak on this one. Can you pull up the UFC stats on Priscila? I want to see her takedown defense. But yeah, this is a good fight, man. This is a fight where Priscila is going to be the better striker. She has power. She has put people away in this division, and that's something to see in the women's division, right? So she definitely can knock these girls out. The stand-up is not the best technically, but the power is there, and she's relentless. They call her Zombie Girl for a reason. She's going to march forward. Now, that marching forward strategy might hurt her here in this fight because Harris, if you notice when she strikes, she strikes kind of tall. Like she's not really like she strikes really tall. So I think that Sijara is gonna be able to get those takedowns. I think she's gonna be able to get in there, get the takedowns here. What does she have here? Takedown defense.
65%.
Okay, 65%. But I think Sijara is actually one of the better grapplers that she's fought, and her stand up where she stands up straight up. I think Sijara is gonna be able to get those takedowns. I think Cardio's gonna be fine because she's gonna be on top, just trying to keep top control. I don't think Sijara is gonna want to stand up with Priscila. The power on Priscila's side is really heavy, and Sijara is a black belt. She's really good as far as wrestling goes. She's gonna be looking to take this to the mat, and I could even see her getting a finish. So I'm gonna go with Sijara Eubanks, first fight of the year, to get the win here.
All right, second fight of the year. Let's look at Charles Johnson versus Jimmy Flick. We see Charles Johnson as the sizable favorite, almost minus 400. Charles Johnson beat Zhalgas Zhumagulov back in December via split decision. We know he has that solid switch stance, Muay Thai type of approach on the feet, patient, fights from the outside, has a lot of feints, good head movements, good overall movement as well. A good regular usage of his jabs and his calf kicks, really composed with his striking. Picks his shots effectively. He can put clean combinations together as well. We know that he was taken down several times, of course, in his debut. So his takedown defense percentage, it doesn't really speak to his actual takedown defense ability, because I would say, again, despite the percentage, I think it's in the 50s or the 60s. His takedown defense is okay. He can work his way back up if he is taken down. And his cardio is definitely there as well. For Jimmy Flick, he hasn't fought since December 2020. So I think that's the first and most important thing to note, because ring rust can definitely be a real thing. He has a good skill set, though. He's a boxer wrestler style of fighter. His boxing is fairly basic, though. Doesn't really move the head much. He uses just enough stand up to attempt that takedown. He's willing to clinch. He's willing to work on the cage. And again, that wrestling approach, I should say, as I mentioned. He has 14 of his 16 wins via submission. So he finds a way to get it there. He finds a way to finish it. Look for body locks, look for changing positions, willing to get tangled up on the ground. His last win was by way of a flying triangle, right? Just as an example. So he's definitely a threat to, go for it at any time. I'll say that I like Charles Johnson to get it done here, but I absolutely hate the odds on this one. I don't think that these odds are worth jumping on at all. I think that Charles Johnson is way too high of a favorite here. I haven't really been overly impressed with him, though we can't deny the talent that he has. I mean, again, he's a crafty striker, but he just hasn't really shown me that killer instinct. That said, especially with his IQ, I think we may potentially see Jimmy Flick's ring rust show, especially with Charles Johnson, losing one, winning his other in terms of his 2 UFC appearances, losing one of them, winning the other one via split decision. I think he's going to have it in the back of his head that he needs to have a little bit more of a performance here. So I do expect him to be a little bit more aggressive than usual. As the better striker, as the faster striker, as the higher IQ striker. But again, don't get me wrong, Jimmy Flick, great dog value here. I can't necessarily call the upset, but I can definitely see why people would be enticed by that. Again, from a betting perspective, I want nothing to do with it, but I think from a pick perspective, I got to go with Charles Johnson. He's the smarter pick, but I definitely understand the value that is there for Jimmy Flick. So again, to make it official, Charles Johnson will be my pick.
Yeah, this is a tough fight. Not really, but I see Jimmy Flick. His only way to win this fight, he's gonna have to latch up some type of submission. Because if you look at Charles Johnson, he's the far better striker. And in his previous fights in the UFC, they gave him 2 well-rounded guys, and Makayev and Zumagulov. when you look at what's his name again? When you look at Flick, he's not as well rounded as those guys. He's looking to get this to the mat. He's gonna try to pull guard. He's gonna try to get a leg. He's gonna try to in his match versus Cody Durden, he did a jumping triangle in a fight he was losing. So at any point he could be losing. Then he's looking for that submission, that home run shot here to win the fight. If he doesn't get a submission, he's not gonna win this fight because the stand-up Charles Johnson is far better in the striking here. He's a much better striker. Flick has horrible striking, and Flick doesn't have the best wrestling. I think Zumagulov actually has better wrestling, but as far as the jiu-jitsu, Flick is on another level with the grappling as far as the jiu-jitsu goes. If you can get this to the mat, if you can get into a dominant position with his jiu-jitsu, Charles Johnson is in trouble. But I got to go with Charles Johnson based on more paths here to win this fight. I think he's going to be able to avoid the wrestling, keep it on the feet, and I think he's just going to piece up Flick here and win the fight. So I'm going to go with Charles Johnson here and you have to remember as well, one thing to note on this fight, at one point Charles Johnson was, when it opened up, the fight was almost a pick'em. It was almost a pick'em. Charles Johnson was a slight favorite, and then all of a sudden people put a lot of money in on Charles Johnson. He was a minus 500, and then the odds went down to what it is today. So the odds went up and down, right? So, but I think Charles Johnson gets it done. Flick is dangerous with his submissions, but I think Charles is ready to keep it on the feet and beat him striking.
All right, fight number 3, we have Dan Argueta taking on Nick Aguirre. Dan Argueta had that unanimous decision loss in his June debut to Damon Jackson. I believe that was short notice. Tough debut as well. Southpaw, he'll switch stance as well. He is a wrestler first, relies on that ground game, has good wrestling, good damage and activity when he's on top, good ground IQ as well to kind of keep you on the ground when he is on top. He is aggressive on the feet as well. He'll use the fakes, use the feints, kind of typical stuff we see from those wrestler type of fighters. Definitely forces his way forward, uses that aggression to close distance. He'll try to pin you against the cage, and again, eventually work that way toward a takedown. What's interesting again is in his debut, we see that it was his first professional loss. He's 8-1 now. That fight versus Damon Jackson, much higher level fighter than what he's used to, of course, and a short notice for him. But in some ways, Damon Jackson was able to expose him a bit. We learned that his takedown defense is not the best. We also learned that defensively, his ground game is not the best overall, right? Damon Jackson had a lot of control time throughout that entire fight. But nonetheless, let's see what he has to show in his second UFC fight as he takes on the newcomer, Nick Aguirre, who is coming in on short notice. He's a UFC newcomer, 7 wins, 7 finishes. Hasn't really faced anyone yet, though. If you look at his wins, they're very questionable. I'll take a look at that in a moment. Southpaw on the feet. He's pretty patient. Good takedown approach to his game as well. That is where he's going to do most of his damage. He has good top position. But unlike an Argueta type of fighter where it's more sort of aggression and damage and activity, he takes his time a little bit more. Good top position. He's patient. He's going to kind of go for position over damage as he tries to set himself up to do what he wants to do on the ground. When the time comes, he does have effective ground and pound when needed. Again, he's finished all of his fights and pretty much all of them have been on the ground. So he has that ability, at least in lesser promotions. Let's see what each of these guys have to offer up in the UFC. We know that Dan Argueta's debut, again, was a short notice fight, undoubtedly a frustrating fight for him. So I do expect him to perform a lot better this time around. And it was a common theme for 2022. It's a continuing theme for 2023. UFC fighters typically have much better performances in their second fight in comparison to their debuts. So I can see Dan Argueta looking a lot better this time around. Level of competition, as I mentioned, is a bit scary for Nick Aguirre. We'll take a look at his 7-0 record here. He hasn't really faced anyone, right? So let's take a look here. 4-2, 2-1, 0-0, 1-1, 0-2, 1-1. So hasn't really faced anyone. It's difficult to say how successful he can be in his style against fighters at higher levels. Whereas with Dan Argueta, at least we can say that although he hasn't faced the stiffest competition either, at least he's been in a better promotion in the LFA before coming to the UFC. I won't say it's a 50-50 fight, but what I can say is that I don't feel confident on either side. I don't feel confident enough in Dan Argueta to bet on him. Actually, I don't even know what the betting line is on this fight. But in terms of making a pick, again, not comfortable, but I can say Dan Argueta will be my pick just for the sake of it being his second fight, for the sake of him having a full training camp for this one, whereas Aguirre is coming in on short notice. And again, that offensive, relentless wrestling style can definitely work in his favor, especially his second time around in the UFC. So I'm going Dan Argueta, but it's not a confident pick. It's not a parlay stuffer that I want. I just think he wins the fight.
Yeah, you made a big point, good point in this fight with the opposition Nick has fought, Aguirre, and he hasn't really fought anybody. And when I'm watching his fights, you can see the skill gap between the fighters. He gets the fight right to the mat, gets the takedown, no takedown defense from his opposition, and he's gonna be fighting Dan Argueta, who has good takedown defense, who's a wrestler. It's gonna be a tough fight here. I think they're hooking up Dan here. As far as I think they're giving him a win here in this spot. Even his previous opponents is kind of similar, whereas they didn't fight anybody, and then they brought in another guy that didn't fight anybody. I think they're trying to give Dan a win here against a guy that wrestles first. Dan can equal that. He can kind of slow down the wrestling, but Dan's the better striker, and Dan's the more proven guy. He can go 3 rounds. Nick, you haven't really seen him in wars in 3 rounds. So I'm gonna go with Dan Argueta here. I think he gets it done here. I think you should feel pretty confident he gets it done. Parlays, I'm not sure yet, but as far as just the way the fight looks and how it's gonna play out, I don't see how Nick gets it done, man. So I got to go Dan Argueta to get the win here.
Fight number 4, we're looking at Allan Nascimento taking on Carlos Hernandez. Allan Nascimento, unanimous decision win over Jake Hadley. That was back in May. Good win on his resume for sure. Hadley was undefeated at the time, and he looked really good in that fight. Did Allan Nascimento. On the feet, he's solid. He's actually introduced as a striker, which I thought was interesting because I do think he's a stronger grappler than he is a striker. But nonetheless, he has good kicks. He trains with Charles Oliveira. So if you can sort of envision that Charles Oliveira style of stand-up, Allan Nascimento kind of mimics that a little bit, right? I was expecting to use the calf kick. He has a decent jab, good diverse combinations. Again, that sort of Oliveira style way of chaining strikes together. Good grappler to that same note, even off of his back. I mentioned the training that he has with Charles Oliveira. Good submission threat, good scrambling. Doesn't look like he has the best takedown defense, but he is very crafty on the ground to a point where he can still be a threat. And offensively, he can land takedowns of his own. We see his takedown numbers there, though, just 1 takedown per, just 20%. I feel like he is a much stronger grappler than he is a wrestler, but again, has that sort of complete ground ability to be a threat no matter what. Carlos Hernandez had that split decision win over Victor Altamirano back in February of 2022, of course. He fights from the outside, decent footwork. The combinations are solid. He's not afraid to engage, has that toughness factor about him as well. The thing with Carlos Hernandez, no real intention behind his punches. 8 wins, none of them are via KO, TKO. So I don't expect punching power to be a factor in this fight. He did land a few takedowns in his last fight, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a strength of his by any means. I mentioned again, Carlos Hernandez has not been a power threat in the past, or at least amongst all of his fights. I think that's gonna, really favor Allan Nascimento. I do like Allan Nascimento in this spot. I can't say I fully trust the odds, but when I take a look at what this fight card presents me with, we will get to that a little bit later when we go through some parlay picks. But I'm looking at Allan Nascimento as potentially being one of the better fights to choose from here. I I feel like I need Allan Nascimento to have sort of one more dominant performance before I can fully trust him. To say minus 400 makes sense, but I get it, right? I mean, I am looking at Nascimento as having a much more complete ground game, a much more dangerous ground game, showing a lot of improvements on the feet to think that he can handle his own there, potentially even be the better striker. Because yes, Carlos Hernandez can do some stuff, but again, doesn't really provide that power threat. So I can see Allan Nascimento sort of taking this fight wherever he wants it to go, and potentially having another dominant performance like he did in his last fight. Or not dominant, but another good performance, I should say, like he did in his last fight. So I'm going Allan Nascimento once again. This potentially would be a parlay pick for me.
Yeah, you gotta look at this fight as a spot Allen's gonna succeed in. In Carlos's last two fights, they were pretty close, and this is a big step up in competition for Carlos. For Allen, this is a step down. Allen had a good showing against Jake Hadley. He won that fight, and Jake Hadley is a tough guy. And Tagir Ulanbekov, one of the Dagestans, the guys from Dagestan, Team Khabib. That was a close fight. I thought Tagir won it clearly, but Allen was dangerous at some points in the fight. He had his spots, and one judge even gave him the win. So it was a split decision, which I don't think it should have been. But I could give Allen one round in that fight for sure. So this is definitely a step down, and I think at some point he's going to get this to the mat. He's going to get this to the ground, and he's going to show he's going to basically show the levels here, and he might get a submission in this spot. He might get a submission, but like Harris said, if it stays standing, I think Allen is not a fish out of water. He can strike, he can keep up with him like with Hadley, but I think at some point in each round he's going to get it to the mat. He's going to hold him there the entire round. Or he's going to get his back, get a rear naked choke, kind of like his training partner, Charles Oliveira. But I like Nascimento, man. I think he's just a level up with Carlos. So I'm going to go at Nascimento to get the win here, and I'm pretty confident he gets it done.
Fight number 5. Let's look at Javid Basharat versus Mateus Mendonça or Mendonça. For Basharat, unanimous decision win over Tony Gravely, 2-0 in the UFC now, still undefeated in general at 13-0. Of those 13 wins, 11 of them are via finish, so definitely can be very dangerous. He's a switch stance fighter. He's very well-rounded, a clean, fluid style of stand-up. The striking diversity looks really good. The calf kicks look good. The in and out movement looks good. He has a Taekwondo background, so good footwork to go along with it. He has good timing, good striking IQ, and pretty elusive in the pocket. Also, really good at putting that consistent pressure on you and that consistent pace on you. And just to round out his game, good top control if he gets the fight to the ground. We see, yes, very small sample size, only 2 UFC fights, but 1.7 takedowns per at 55%. I think that's a good idea of who he can be, right? When he sort of wants to bring it to the ground, he has that ability to do so. He has active ground and pound. He has good positional improvements. We know that he can find the submissions as well. Again, I mentioned a number of finishes for him. Just a really well-rounded fighter, and again, a good-looking contender for 2023, or prospect, I should say, for Javid Basharat. Mateus Mendonça, undefeated newcomer. He's coming from Dana White Contender Series. From what I see, good on the feet, decent movement, diverse striker as well, has very powerful hands, likes to come forward. From what I've seen, he can be very explosive as well, especially in counter situations. I've seen him use the clinch if he pressures you against the cage. I've seen him, a decently protective guard out of him. But that also means I've seen him be taken down, right? So be careful with that. But if he is taken down, I have seen him scramble. He also has a few wins via submission. So that's going to tell me he's at least comfortable down there. And he's Brazilian, so you can kind of assume in some ways. Basharat brothers, obviously Javid being the UFC brother in this one, very talented, very highly skilled fighters. I think Javid is one of those fighters that I can trust when they have a solid opponent in front of them. Like we saw with Tony Gravely, solid opponent. Like we saw with Trevin Jones, solid opponent. But I can trust Javid Basharat in those moments to get it done. I do feel good about Javid here as well. I want to recognize that Mendonça is definitely a threat, but I do eventually expect Javid Basharat to sort of outclass, find his timing, start to pick him apart, prove to be the better overall fighter, regardless of where this fight goes. So I'm looking for Javid Basharat to remain undefeated. This probably being one of my more confident picks on the card itself. So Javid Basharat is going to be my pick.
Yeah, this is a good fight, man. This is gonna be a lot of skills in that cage. Mendonça when I was doing some research on this guy. I remember his fight on the Contender Series. But this guy is really skilled. This guy has good wrestling, good striking, good power. This guy can put you out with one shot. So Javid has to be on his P's and Q's here and make sure he doesn't get caught, right? Because this guy, he's fighting a really good fighter. Both guys undefeated. Someone's gotta go. When I look at Javid, just like the last fight, there's levels, man. And I just think he's a level up on Mateus Mendonça at this point. I think right now, Javid is the much better fighter. I think Mendonça has a good ceiling, so he could definitely become something. But I think if they fight today, right now, Javid has fought a really good fighter in Was it Gravely?
Yeah.
Yeah, he fought a really good fighter in Gravely, out wrestled Gravely, showed his cardio. He didn't slow down. And in this fight, one thing I noticed about Mendonça is as the fight went on, his cardio is not there. That's one thing. He doesn't have the best cardio. He does have cardio, but Javid definitely has better cardio if he pushes a higher pace. So that's one thing that I noticed. Another thing I noticed is, yes, Mendonça has good striking, but if you look at the technique, Javid is technically has more technique with his striking, and he mixes in the kicks really well. Javid's gonna have the better wrestling in this spot. Stays out of submissions. He can kind of lay on top and cruise his way to victory. So I like Mendonça. I really do like this guy, but I just think Javid's a level up. So I got to go with Javid to get it done. I echo the confidence on Harris's side, man. I think you could feel confident in this guy. He's gonna show up. As long as he doesn't get caught, I don't see him losing this fight. So Javid is my pick here.
Fight number 6, Mateus Rębecki, Nick Fiore. Rębecki is the UFC newcomer. Actually, both of these guys are making their UFC debuts. Rębecki was on the Contender Series. He's a high pressure fighter, a lot of head movement, a lot of forward movement as well. He is, unsurprisingly, that relentless wrestler type of fighter. So he wants to look for that takedown right away. He's good at closing the distance. When he does land the takedown, I mean, we see, obviously this is only based on a Contender Series sample, but 10 takedowns per 15 minutes gives you an idea of how quickly he wants to take it to the ground, how good his top control can be, how good his ground and pound can be, his ability to finish fights. He's a good chain wrestler as well. But let's see how that, continues to translate at the UFC level. Going up against Nick Fiore, 6-0, undefeated. But his first 2 fights were against the same guy, and that same guy has almost 100 losses on his record. So, I almost feel like those shouldn't count. Just not really battle tested at all, Nick Fiore. But in terms of his skill set, good jiu-jitsu, good overall ground game, including the takedown, the striking looks decent as well, decent kicks. Trains with Calvin Kattar, trains with Rob Font, so has a good camp behind him. I notice he fights from the outside often, uses those kicks to set things up. Pretty composed overall. Nick Fiore, I think, will allow Rębecki to control the center, to dictate the pace with the way that Fiore kind of fights from the outside. I think Fiore's grappling is legitimately dangerous in this fight. Again, especially with Rębecki looking to bring the fight to the ground, put himself in those potential situations. But I also think that Rębecki is smart enough, right? As a wrestler, he's done this a lot. So I think he's smart enough to not put himself in terrible positions where he fully exposes that neck, or gives up the arm bar, or gives up the triangle, or what have you. Outside of that, I can see Rębecki pushing the pace, as I mentioned, landing the takedowns, as I mentioned, maintaining top control pretty much throughout the entirety of this fight. That said, no newcomer in general is worth minus 700. So, I mean, by default, there's value on the dog. But my pick analytically, for all reasons, goes on the side of Mateus Rębecki. Betting wise, don't put me anywhere near this fight. I don't even want to explore the underdog. But making a pick, I'm looking at Mateus Rębecki.
Yeah, Mateus all day, man. I'll be quick, man. This Fiore guy, he's fought nobody, man. And Rębecki is 16-1. He beat a guy named Nurmagomedov. He beat a guy named Aguirre Imavov. Like these are fighter names, man. Like this guy's beating some good guys, man. 11-1, 30-12, 12-2, 12-1, 12-2, 18-5. Rębecki all day, man. And one thing I noticed when I was watching tape on both guys is this Fiore guy this is gonna be a very important thing in the fight. This Fiore guy is physically not strong enough to stop Rębecki. That's what this fight's gonna come down to. Once Rębecki grabs him, he's going to the mat. So I'm gonna go Rębecki here. I understand why the odds are this big. The other guy doesn't have a chance at all. And Rębecki gets it done. Should get a finish, man, in this spot.
All right, final fight of the prelims: Claudio Ribeiro versus Abdul Razak Alhassan. Alhassan had that split decision loss to Joaquin Buckley, 1-4 in his last 5 now. Despite the loss, he did look a bit more reliable in that fight. Still has those explosive hands. Cardio is still somewhat questionable. We know that all of his wins are via KO, TKO. But his ring control looked a little bit more consistent in that Buckley fight. Looked like he was pressuring a little bit more effectively, allowing his patience to carry his cardio a little bit further, to a point where he had that winning third round, right, landing the takedown and staying on top. Still has bad takedown defense though, so and old. He's 37, 38 years old. So Abdul Razak Alhassan, I mean, just not the best UFC talent, but he's taking on a newcomer in Claudio Ribeiro. 6-fight winning streak, sharp calf kicks, bouncy and patient on the feet. I noticed he's going to do a lot of fighting from the outside, fighting from distance. Almost play that counter puncher role where he could definitely be explosive. I don't really think he has the best clinch or best takedown defense though. But I'm looking at two fighters who are primarily going to keep the fight standing. And I've been going back and forth with this fight, as neither fighter presents a reliable style. I think for Ribeiro, not necessarily dominating guys that he beats, that's concerning. I've seen him be controlled, I've seen him be pressured, clinched, taken down, etc. before he finds that big moment. For Alhassan, just overall unreliable, right? Especially with the cardio issues. But I'm looking at a very winnable fight for Alhassan. I think both of these guys are power threats. I think if Alhassan can show us what he did in rounds 1 and 3 of his last fight, I think he can pull it off. Close fight. The odds reflect that 50-50 fight in a lot of ways. But I kind of have to go with Alhassan just by way of being the UFC veteran at this point. No confidence whatsoever in this pick, but Claudio Ribeiro hasn't shown me enough. So I'm going with Alhassan on this one.
Yeah, just like you, man. I was going back and forth in this fight. It's a tough one, man, because these guys are gonna stand and bang. So it's gonna be who lands that big shot, and then who follows up is gonna win this fight. So anyone can do that. The good things on the Alhassan side. I think he has a better striking defense here. I think that he at least tries to put his hands back up. When you look at Ribeiro, his hands are down the whole time, almost, right? So his hands are low. When you back him up, he keeps his head up high. So these are spots, these are places that he can get caught by Alhassan. And for Alhassan, this is a step down in competition, right? He's fighting a newcomer off the Contender Series, and Alhassan has been fighting a lot of dangerous fighters. On the Ribeiro side, though, this is going to be a striking fight. He's going to have the reach. That's important. He's going to have the reach advantage, and I think he's the more patient striker. I think he has a more diverse striking. He throws the leg kicks, and he's fast with his hands, very fast with his hands. I actually think that I think this is going to be the first fight we disagree on. I think Ribeiro gets it done. I think he gets it done, man. I think, again, I don't feel confident because just yesterday I was on the Alhassan side. I'm looking at the power. If he lands one of those bombs, Ribeiro likely is going down. But Ribeiro on the other side, the more dynamic striker, the more reach, the younger guy. And in one fight, I was watching him really utilize those leg kicks, so I know it's there. And that's something that I think you can exploit against a shorter fighter, a fighter like Alhassan. So I'm going to go with Ribeiro. We know as the fight goes on, Alhassan does slow down. So we know Ribeiro can go to 3 rounds and kind of hold his cardio. So that's another thing on his side. As long as he avoids that power shot, I think he gets it done here. So I'm going to go Claudio Ribeiro here to beat Alhassan, likely by finish.
Let's move on to our main card, first main card of the year. We have Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Raoni Barcelos. Really good bantamweight fight here. Umar Nurmagomedov had that unanimous decision win over Nate Maness. That was back in June. Still undefeated, 15-0. He can fight in both stances. Pretty crafty in his stand-up. Sneaky strikes, sneaky angles. I like his head kick, especially. Really light on the feet. Really good fakes. And, I mean, to his name, Sambo world champion. You know, he's exactly who you think he's going to be on the ground. Takedown entries are really good. Relentless with his wrestling, good chain wrestling to go along with it. Half of his wins are via submission. So it's not just wrestling. It's definitely that overall ground game. Umar Nurmagomedov, definitely one of the more dangerous prospects in the UFC. Raoni Barcelos, unanimous decision win over Trevin Jones. That was back in October. He's a good fighter on paper, very credentialed fighter, good in the stand-up. Good striking defense, good front kick, good up kick, good calf kick, very diverse. Again, like I said, the hands are pretty fast to go along with it. The boxing in general is very good. A very sharp striker. Good clinch. He has some takedowns as well, 1.7 per fight as we see. Good wrestling overall. He's an expert grappler. 93% takedown defense as well. So that tells you that the fight's usually going to occur where he wants it to. And that 93% is going to be the most important stat for this fight because, of course, we know that Umar Nurmagomedov pretty much gets people down at will, 5 takedowns per at almost 50%. Barcelos, as this big of an underdog, I mean, plus 500 will technically always be worth it, right? I mean, he's a highly skilled fighter. That said, I think despite Raoni Barcelos' ability on the ground, again, very complete fighter, very good takedown defense. I think despite all of that, you have to assume that Umar Nurmagomedov has more to offer on the ground, as that Sambo style, as that Dagestani style, training with Khabib, or I don't know how close Khabib is to the game anymore, but you just have to assume that Umar has more to offer there. Now, in terms of the stand-up, Barcelos may be more complete of a striker than Nurmagomedov, but I think Nurmagomedov is more than capable, and we have seen Raoni Barcelos not necessarily lose to guys that he shouldn't, but his striking prowess isn't showing the way that it should in some of his more recent fights. I do feel pretty confident picking Umar Nurmagomedov here, but from a betting perspective, I mean, it's just simply due to the odds being as high as they are. I don't want to jump on it. I don't just want to jump on the big favorites because that's how, something is guaranteed to go wrong if you just throw them all together on a parlay. So I'm going to be picky and choosy about which fights I'm actually putting on a parlay. But in terms of confidence level, I mean, this fight does meet the ticket, right? Umar Nurmagomedov should get the job done, but at minus 700, I'm not interested from a betting perspective.
No, definitely, man. This is very disrespectful, these odds, man. Minus 700, plus 500 on Raoni Barcelos. This guy is high-level wrestling. He's going to be the better striker in this fight. He really needs a win. But there's some things that aren't going for him in this fight. Yes, he's the better striker, but his age is creeping up. His last fight against Victor Henry, he didn't look good at all. And I think the entire fight was striking, and he couldn't really get anything going. Against Nurmagomedov, man, he's gonna be fighting. I think Nurmagomedov is the second guy after is the guy after Islam in that Dagestan stable they have over there. I think he's the next guy as far as the hierarchy goes, as far as skills go. Who's gonna make a splash? Who's gonna get to that title shot quicker after Islam? I think that's this guy, man. I think Umar is he has the game. I think he's gonna be able to tire Barcelos out with his relentless grappling. He keeps up a pace. They train in the mountains. Those guys don't get tired. And it's the same thing, right? If you can't knock these guys out, you're going to eventually get vacuumed into that Dagestan style. So I'm going to have to go with Umar. I think the age is going to be a problem for Raoni Barcelos. Yes, he has wrestling, but that's a different type of wrestling than Umar has. And I think eventually he's going to get it to the mat. He's going to tire this guy out as the fight goes on. I don't think he's going to get the finish in this spot, but I think he's going to win 3-0. So I'm going to go Umar on Nurmagomedov here to get the win.
Second fight of our main card. Good one in the women's bantamweight division. We have Ketlen Vieira versus Raquel Pennington. For Ketlen Vieira, she's on a 2-fight winning streak. She had that split decision win over Holly Holm. That was a questionable win, of course. If you check MMA decision on that, a lot of folks went Holly Holm. Some people thought Holly Holm even won that. I think it was 49-46. I think some people had thought Holly Holm won that fight. So, split decision win nonetheless for Ketlen Vieira, 2-fight winning streak nonetheless. With her style, she has a lot of fakes and feints with that jab. She's looking to set up her timing, looking to keep distance, has that good long jab, predictable, a little bit of a predictable, but also a solid right hand, that right straight hand to go along with it. She has a solid calf kick as well, and a pretty well-rounded game. She has good takedowns. She's a black belt for judo. She also has a decent clinch as well, and good grappling, right? She's a black belt for Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well. Solid ground and pound to go along with it. So like I said, Ketlen Vieira just a solid overall fighter, and potentially a contender in this bantamweight division throughout the course of 2023. Let's wait and see. She's going up against Raquel Pennington, who has had a bit of a resurgence in her career. She's on a 4-fight winning streak after beating Aspen Ladd back in April. I still think toughness is kind of her biggest strength. Look for her to control the center of the octagon. She's probably most closely identifies as a boxer on the feet, primarily hands, a good jab, good striking defense, and she's physically strong, right? Especially when she gets you against the cage. She has an effective tie clinch and 1 takedown per fight to go along with that. Pennington has that experience advantage without a doubt. I think, again, her IQ is starting to excel with this little winning streak that she's on. She's using very effective boxing against her opponents. She's using a decent clinch against her opponents as well, and really starting to string fights in her favor. I like Pennington's striking more than Vieira's in this fight. I think it's cleaner. I think it's more accurate. She puts combinations together a lot better than Vieira does, a lot more effectively. Vieira has amazing takedown defense, so Pennington's attack may be limited to her stand-up. I mentioned the 1 takedown per fight that she would normally otherwise get. I think that's potentially where Ketlen Vieira can take over in this fight. The ground game, right? Not only stopping Raquel Pennington from potentially taking the fight to the ground, but using her own wrestling, using her judo, using her takedown ability in those clinch situations, using that jiu-jitsu, using that top control to essentially score rounds in her favor. if you think about Raquel Pennington, even on this 4-fight winning streak that she's on, she's given up takedowns in each of those 4 wins. So that tells you that she can definitely be exposed to that. I think that can be a path for Ketlen Vieira to get the win. And considering UFC just gave her that gift against Holly Holm, you got to think that she may have the judges in her favor if the fight is close, right? Raquel Pennington is one of those fighters, 9 losses. You're okay giving her a loss in a close situation in favor of a 13-2 potential contender. So I think Vieira has more things working in her favor for this fight, not only stylistically but some of the X factors as well. So Ketlen Vieira is going to be my pick for this one. I do understand why the odds are as close as they are, but I also I wouldn't have changed my mind if Vieira was a minus 180. I'd still kind of feel the same way. So Ketlen Vieira is going to be my pick for this one. I'm not necessarily saying it's a confident one, but as I analyze it, I think Ketlen Vieira is in a good spot.
Yeah, this is one of those fights you don't want to really get involved with the betting here. When I look at Vieira, she's going to be the better grappler. She's going to be able to, if she gets it to the mat, she's going to have a big advantage on the mat. But Raquel is no slouch, right? She's a strong girl. If she can get the underhook, I think she can stop the takedown, right? And Vieira doesn't have the best takedowns. Now, when it comes to the striking, I think Raquel is the better striker. And if they get close with the striking, Vieira looks a bit slow when she's throwing shots. Well, Raquel looks sharp. She's throwing jabs. She's throwing straights. She's throwing the hook when it's needed. I think she's gonna show that she's a much better striker when the fight happens. I like Raquel in this spot. She has shown me big improvements in her boxing in the last couple fights, and I'm actually impressed with the fighter she's becoming. I think she's much better striking now than she was, say, 4 or 5 years ago, when she was really challenging, when she was really moving up the ranks. I think this is a much better striker in Raquel. So I like her in this spot. It's gonna be a tough fight. This fight can go either way. I think she can kind of, if she gets taken down the first round, I think she has the best skills to stay alive. And then as the fight goes on, takedowns are going to be harder. And I think she's going to be able to outbox Ketlen Vieira in this spot. So yeah, Raquel's my pick in this spot to get the win.
Fight number 3 of our main card, Punahele Soriano versus Roman Kopylov. For Soriano, he beat Dalchalungi Ambula back in July. He's a southpaw, really good power in that left hand as a result of that, especially as a counter puncher. That's probably his favorite punch. Heavy hands in general, though. Good looping punches, good combinations, good combinations as well. He can overextend, miss big at times, though, so be careful for that. He's a good wrestler, all things considered. State champion wrestler, though he does like to keep the fight standing. He has that wrestling in his back pocket. I will say he has lackluster takedown defense, though, just 31%, but that shouldn't be too relevant in this fight. More than likely, I'll discuss Kopylov a bit later. He likes to come forward, keep the fight on the feet, keep the pressure on, control center, and we know that his cardio has been an issue in the past, but it has looked a little bit more consistent, though he can still slow down a bit as the fight goes on. Roman Kopylov, on the other hand, beat Alessio Di Chirico back in September. He's a southpaw. He's a disciplined striker. Fights at a good distance, good movement, patient striker, sets things up with a good long jab and good calf kick. He's going to have a little bit of a height advantage, going to have a couple of inches in reach as well in terms of his advantages. Also has good striking speed to go along with that, good combinations, and good fluidity to his striking as well. I think this is a very interesting fight. The more that I think about it, when I initially looked at this, I was sort of Punahele Soriano all the way. But this fight got me thinking, definitely. When I think about who may be more reliable, I still lean toward Punahele Soriano. Volume and output have been issues for Roman Kopylov in the past. He allows himself to be outstruck, and he's a striker, so that's definitely not the best combination for success. We know that Punahele Soriano can land a takedown or two, whereas Kopylov has, just one takedown landed in 3 UFC fights. So you got to think that Soriano can sort of have the more overall diverse game, MMA game as well. But we can't look past the fact that Roman Kopylov is indeed Dagestani, and while he may not have the wrestling, he definitely has fantastic takedown defense. That makes for an interesting fight on the feet, where Kopylov's patient striking style, I think, can actually start to work in his favor as this fight goes on. I think Kopylov will have an important striking speed advantage in this fight as well. Despite being unreliable, I actually like the dog here. I like Roman Kopylov. I think there's good value on him. I think that he's the more pure striker between the two. And I think that most of this fight is going to occur on the feet. I can see Soriano going for a few big bombs in the first round and a half, unless he gets Kopylov out of there. In that first round and a half, I can see Kopylov's striking style eventually start to take over. So I'm looking at Roman Kopylov to get the job done here. He hasn't been the most active fighter over the last, say, 2.5 years. But if I look at his last performance versus Alessio Di Chirico, it shows me that he potentially has sharpened up his game to a point where he gets a win in this situation. So I like Roman Kopylov to get it done if I assume that he will continue to improve the way he did in that Di Chirico fight. Kopylov is going to be my pick.
You know what, man? This is one of the hardest fights on the card because how I look at the fight, I think Kopylov, if this fight gets to the second, third round, it's his fight to win because Soriano has shown that he really slows down after that first round, and his cardio really doesn't keep up for 3 rounds, right? So if this gets out of that first round, there's a good chance Kopylov takes over. So even if Soriano wins that round, that might be a spot you want to bet live. Kopylov to win the fight after that first round if he loses, because Soriano definitely comes out good in that first round. And in this fight, Kopylov, I think, is a more technical striker. He has more tools with his striking. When I look at Soriano, though, he has that power. This guy is he's looking to knock you out with every shot. I think if he connects, he's going to knock Kopylov out. So it's really a tough fight to decide because Soriano, I think, first round gets it done. If he doesn't get it done, likely Kopylov gets him, right? So heads, tails, I got to go with Soriano, man. Like I was going back and forth, but I think that the power Soriano has, I think he's one of the hardest punchers in this division. And I think he's going to connect with Kopylov in that first round and hurt him. So I'm going to go Soriano here to get the knockout here, get the win.
Co-main event then of the evening, we have Dan Ige versus Damon Jackson. Dan Ige 3-fight losing streak after that unanimous decision loss to Movsar Evloev. He's a good all-around fighter, all things considered. A good stand-up. He'll show the fakes and the feints, good level changes, good punch IQ, good combinations, good in and out movements as well. Good lateral movement as well. He has good accuracy with his striking, good defensive guard, but unfortunately that comes at the cost of not really having the best takedown defense at just 51%. Offensively, he can definitely land a takedown or two. Otherwise, again, you're looking at a solid overall fighter who prefers to fight on the feet, I should say, and again has that solid striking IQ to go along with it. Damon Jackson, on the other hand, is on a 4-fight winning streak. He beat Pat Sabatini back in September. He has decent boxing, decent kickboxing, not really the cleanest technically with his striking, but decent combinations, good pace, and good activity on the feet. He has pretty suspect takedown defense, although very legitimate grappling to go along with it. He's actually introduced as a grappler, so no surprise there. He is also a good, effective wrestler to go along with it, at least what he's shown over the course of these last 4 fights where he's been winning. 2.62 takedowns per fight. He's going to grind it out against the cage for as long as he needs to in order to land that takedown. He's going to commit to that takedown even if you get up. He's going to go for it again and again, chain those wrestling attempts together, has a solid body lock, active on the ground as well. And we saw 2 fights ago when he took on Dan Argueta who I mentioned on the prelim. Just very good back control, very good top control in general. We know that Dan Ige needs a win here, but I don't think this is the best matchup for him. I know that Dan Ige definitely has the name value. He is the favorite in this fight. I get it, and I definitely understand it. But I trust Damon Jackson here. I trust Damon Jackson based on how he has looked in his past couple of fights. Dan Ige versus Movsar Evloev. Evloev, very different opponent, ability wise in comparison to Damon Jackson, but kind of not really, right? There are some blueprint examples that can be taken from that fight. It's a good example of the advantage that you have against Ige when you have that takedown first mentality, in addition to striking that can keep up. Damon Jackson checks those two boxes. I actually think there's really good value on Damon Jackson here in what's kind of close to a pick'em, but where Damon Jackson is an even money underdog. I just think it's a bad matchup for Dan Ige. I know he needs to win, but Damon Jackson's the bigger guy. He's going to resort to the ground game. Ige has shown he can be taken down, and it wouldn't surprise me if Damon Jackson just makes it a really frustrating fight for Dan Ige, and we look at Dan Ige losing his fourth fight in a row. So I'm going with the underdog here, Damon Jackson. I think he just a good matchup for him. I think he gets it done, and he has good momentum behind his name right now.
Yeah, this Damon Jackson guy is looking good lately, man. He's on a little streak now. But you got to factor in that fight versus Argueta. Argueta is a normal bantamweight, and that was his first fight at featherweight. Now his fights on the same card is on featherweight, so he looks like he's making this division his home. But prior to that fight, he was a bantamweight fighter. So Damon was the much bigger guy in that fight. This fight, he's fighting a legit featherweight. I actually like Ige, man. 50K Dan Ige, man. I think he's going to be able to keep it on the feet. He needs a win, man. He needs to keep his job alive. And this is going to save his job. This is going to give him another 2 fights. He's motivated. And when you look at Damon Jackson, he wants to outwork you. He wants to outwork you with his grappling. And he wants to use his cardio as a weapon. Dan Ige has good cardio. This is a step down in competition for Dan Ige. This is a big step up for Damon Jackson. I think Ige gets it done, man. Keep it on the feet and outstrike him. So I'm going to go Dan Ige, Dan 50K Ige to get this one done.
Let's move on then to our main event of the evening. We have Sean Strickland versus Nassourdine Imavov. Again, mentioned it at the beginning of the video. This fight was supposed to be Kelvin Gastelum versus Nassourdine Imavov, where we talked about it before recording, but you really liked Imavov in that spot, and I definitely agreed with you there. But we have Sean Strickland stepping in, and this one will be at 205 light heavyweight, of course, to accommodate for the weight that Sean Strickland would otherwise have had to cut. Sean Strickland, of course, is filling in, as I mentioned. He last fought just a month ago. It was the last card of 2022 versus Jared Cannonier. And he's on a 2-fight losing streak. So, pretty hungry for a win. So I can see why he stepped in on this one. We know he's a solid overall striker. We know he stays in your face, kind of marches you down with that good constant pressure. We know his hands are pretty controlled, doesn't really waste any effort. Good jab, good timing, sharp combinations, a little bit of a ground game to go along with it as well. 85% takedown defense to go along with it as well, though I don't think that would be relevant for this one. And we know, of course, he has that reliable cardio, which I'm curious to see. Is that cardio going to show up in the same way we're used to on short notice for a 5-rounder? History would tell you, well, yeah, it should be no problem. So Sean Strickland, looking to get back in there right away and looking to get into the win column, but he's taking on Nassourdine Imavov, where that's not going to be easy. Imavov is on a 3-fight winning streak after a unanimous decision win over Joaquin Buckley back in September. He has good calm movement. He's very light on his feet, very crafty striker. We see it from his fellow Frenchman, Cyril Gane, kind of that similar style of stand-up. Good quick jab, good counter left hook as well. A good counter puncher in general with good timing. Great striking speed. He's definitely confident in that. That's going to allow him to be very relaxed in the ring. High level striker, high IQ as well. His takedown defense is good in his own right? 76% takedown defense. He's trained with Dagestani wrestlers, so he can definitely land that takedown as well. So don't really take his lack of numbers to mean a lack of ability. He just prefers the fight to be standing. Imavov showed me a level of confidence in his last fight that he's going to need to have in order to take on these higher ranked fighters in the division, of course, in the middleweight division, like a Sean Strickland, right? We know that this is short notice for Sean Strickland. We know that's going to be a disadvantage for him, but we know he pretty much stays in shape, has great cardio, so may not be much of an impact that it would be for any other fighter. But my prediction itself, I know usually main events we want to talk about for a longer period of time, but my prediction won't be that long. I'm looking at a striking match here. Honestly, I think this is a great opportunity for Imavov to showcase his skills. I think he's the much more dynamic striker. I think he's going to have a striking speed advantage in this style of fight that he's going to be looking for. My gut says that Sean Strickland's style will be fairly straightforward and almost basic against Imavov. And it's not that I feel the same way as I did for Strickland versus Alex Pereira. It's not that, because Pereira was a huge power threat. But it's somewhat similar in that, my thinking was that Pereira, legitimate kickboxer, should have been just more highly skilled than Sean Strickland, who is kind of an MMA striker taking on a pure kickboxer. I kind of feel the same way here, right? So Imavov, pure with his ability, Sean Strickland, more of that MMA striking style. I think Nassourdine Imavov is going to have an opportunity to really have a showcase here. What could work against Imavov is if he just tries too much, too hard, does not get Sean Strickland out of there, and Strickland just continues pushing his way through round 3, through round 4, through round 5. But I would be relying on Sean Strickland getting beating up, taking the damage, and then taking over, as opposed to Imavov, who I feel is the more talented striker, and just collecting rounds and putting rounds in his favor, making it a boring fight if he needs to, again, a la his French counterpart, Cyril Gane. So I'm going with Nassourdine Imavov here. I think he's going to get the job done. Again, I think he's the more dynamic striker, the more diverse striker, and he's had the full training camp. So I like Imavov in this spot. I think this is a good matchup for him. So Imavov is my pick. Sean Strickland loses 3 in a row.
Yeah, this is a tough fight. If it was 3 rounds, it'd be a lot easier for me to pick. But 5 rounds, I think that favors Strickland. He has shown that he has cardio to go the 5 rounds with his fighting style, where he has the high guard, just flicking jabs, marching his opponent down. He's not releasing a lot of energy when he does that, right? So if this is a 5-round fight, which it is, it's definitely going to help Strickland in that scenario. But when I look at these guys and I look at what they do, and I just think Imavov can bank the first 3 rounds. I think he's going to have enough cardio to bank the first 3 rounds. He's going to have to beat the jab. But again, he's throwing left, right, uppercuts, body shots. He's going for takedowns. He's a more well-rounded guy. He's not just following you around the ring throwing jabs like a zombie kind of thing that Strickland does. So I'm gonna go with Imavov, man. The more dynamic striker. He's gonna be throwing more things in this fight. Strickland is kind of just following you around, throwing jabs, high guard, throwing jabs. I think Imavov can win rounds with the hardest shots, which I think he's gonna do. And I think he's gonna mix in a takedown or 2. I think he could get this to the mat and get some damage done there. But I like Imavov in the spot as well. So I'm going to go Imavov to get the win.
All right, let's take it to Vegas at that point, and let's take a look at some underdogs. Again, as I mentioned, the Daniel Argueta fight. Don't have updated odds on that one yet, but nonetheless, I will read out the
He's a
underdogs.
favorite. We know he's a favorite. So
Yeah, we know he's a favorite. That's a good point. In terms of underdogs, though, we're looking at Priscila Cachoeira is an underdog. Jimmy Flick is an underdog. Carlos Hernandez, Mateus Mendonça, Nick Fiore. That Alhassan fight is a pick'em, so we will consider either of them to be underdogs. Raoni Barcelos, boy, this betting line is bad, minus 950 on this platform. But Raoni Barcelos is the underdog there, of course. Raquel Pennington is an even money underdog. Roman Kopylov is an underdog. Damon Jackson is an even money underdog. And that Imavov fight, close to a pick'em, but we will consider Sean Strickland to be the slight underdog there.
All right. So if Imavov was the underdog or pick him, I would have went with him. Since he's not, I'm gonna go with Raquel Pennington.
Right, Raquel Pennington, even money underdog there. In terms of my underdog pick, I am looking at Damon Jackson. I think he has a real shot in that one. And in terms of parlay picks, what are you looking at?
I like Nascimento, Basharat, and Imavov.
I laugh because I have the exact same ticket. So I'm just going to collect that here. So we said,
honestly though, I'd have Umar and Nurmagomedov, but the odds are not making any sense, right? I'd also have Charles Johnson, but the odds aren't making sense either.
yep. And clearly our thinking is the exact same for this card because those are two additional, even the Rębecki fight, I was like, hey, there's a real shot there too. But these guys are just not, you don't want a minus 800 on your card, breaking your parlay. You don't want a minus 950 on your parlay and that be the fight that, the fighter breaks his ankle accidentally or something like that. So again, we're starting the year with this exact same parlay. Nassourdine Imavov, Allan Nascimento, Javid Basharat. I think those three is your best opportunity to get a pretty solid payout. That would be a plus 195, which is pretty healthy. $100 will get you overall winnings of $195. And for our bigger bettors, $250 will get you total winnings of 487 total profit, I should say. So let's wrap up there. Let's finish on that note with our first UFC Fight Night event of the year. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. Make sure you hit the thumbs up and make sure you comment on the video as well. Of course, UFC Fight Night, Nassourdine Imavov versus Sean Strickland. This has been the UFC prediction and analysis video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Getting our first video out for 2023 in our usual fashion. I go by the name of Harris. He goes by the name of Zahn. Let's get this money.
Let's do it.